Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Obsicast. Today, we are joining you from the University of Exeter, where Breaking Convention 2025 is happening. Breaking Convention is Europe's largest psychedelic conference. Over 1,500 people have gathered here for 3 days, including thought leaders and wisdom keepers from all over the world to discuss psychedelics, altered states of consciousness, and so on and so forth. One of the participants here is Dr. Sadaf Lotfalian. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you so much for agreeing to appear on Obsicast. Dr. Lotfalian. Just a brief introduction for those of you who don't know you. Dr. Lotfalian is a licensed clinical psychologist who has worked with the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. She has co-facilitated Psilocybin sessions there as part of her training. In addition to your clinical practice, you're an educator, an activist, and also you're involved in discussions about the importance of accessibility and inclusivity in psychedelic medicine, advocating for anti-racist and decolonial approaches. Thank you so much for joining me. Just to start, please tell me a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to get on this path.
Thank you so much for having me. Pain. I think my personal grief led me to psychology in sort of hoping that I would find light again or love again. And that was maybe 20 years ago. I went through a very difficult period of losing my father very young, and the grief that I wrestled with and the shock and the trauma of that and immigration and family dynamics and legal systems all sort of contributed to a level of pain that I couldn't necessarily just sort of resolve on my own. So I became a student of philosophy and psychology and spiritual psychology, mostly Buddhism, that became a savior, actually, on some level, giving me props and tools to reconnect and find that sort of lightness or playfulness or innocence or joy again, knowing that that's an ongoing practice. Like I'm not graduated, but that every moment is a new invitation to sort of transmute pain into love.
And when did you become interested in psychedelic assisted therapy?
Personal use. When I was an undergrad student at University of British Columbia in Vancouver, a friend of mine said one day, I have made tea. I've made some tea and I've made a playlist, and we're going to a park and we're gonna take this tea and sit in silence and listen to music. And which was mushroom tea, psilocybin tea, and not knowing what I was actually getting myself into, I saw a reflection of my father, a projection of my own fantasy onto the trees around me. And at that time I realized how suppressed my grief had been, and how I was sort of very much in a cycle of suffering without any awareness. Like I thought that I was just functioning well. I was a student. I was productive. I was social. I was all these things, but I didn't know that I had so many protective mechanisms to actually separate me from intimacy and love, until that night when I realized I was very fearful to actually experience the loss that I felt with my dad. And that sparked an interest in sort of gaining awareness into my consciousness on a much deeper level, parts of consciousness that are suppressed and you don't always have access to, but really in the undercurrent of everything, they're still doing their thing. They're still affecting you. It's just not in your conscious awareness. And so I applied for different internships as a psychology student, and I got very lucky. This was back in 2010, and psychedelic medicine, the research of it was not that common, and I got an internship at Johns Hopkins, and I moved to Baltimore, and I became a research coordinator on the psilocybin trials, and then they asked me to co-facilitate the psilocybin sessions, and I just witnessed people transform, from that sort of stuckness and limitation and distortion and delusion to freedom and sort of access to hope again, access to becoming, just a loving, better, kinder human. So that's when I realized, wow, this portal it is potent in helping people get there. And back then, the research team said, you have to go get your PhD. There was it was very sort of, still is, hierarchical. Mm-hmm. So I started getting my PhD, and here we are.
Could that healing that you just described be reached without psychedelics?
Absolutely. One of the things I love to talk about, especially being in an Iranian context, is that we actually traditionally have many different props and tools and portals to access that love from within, that then connects us to something much larger than ourselves, and understanding that consciousness is everything and nothing, and love is everywhere and everything and everyone and no one, and that's our poetry. Like, I'm a student of Masnavi, and that portal takes me there. Sitting with different tribes in Iran, they have no access to psychedelics, but they have very trance-like containers with the practice of drumming and chanting and singing and movement and the breath. That it doesn't necessarily include any plant medicines, but it really is about the container that you set up. And as long as you've got the breath and movement and song and community, I think, and nature, you have the opportunity to go there, I think. But of course, the intelligence of plant medicines is just like a true gift that makes it a little easier to access.
You mentioned that you sat with tribes in Iran.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
I was very lucky to have a few friends who are poets at heart and truly spiritual artists who invited me to go to Qeshm, for example. And I don't know how much you know about Qeshm, but there's a Zar ceremony, for example, in...
And I need you to explain a bit more for our listeners who are not necessarily familiar with
so that. Qeshm is an island in southern Iran that at this point, I think unfortunately, it might be changing a bit because it's getting a little, it's on the map now. But traditionally, they've actually been quite untouched, and they have a great sort of influence from the African sort of continent and the Arab world, and a type of spiritual, traditional Sufi and Muslim practices as well. And they're connected to the sort of Masnavi, or I think in the West, Rumi, the Rumi literature. And they have these belief systems around pain. And so when pain takes over, for whatever reason, they don't actually pathologize anything. They call it different types of winds that kind of take over the psyche or the spirit. And they have these ceremonies called Zar, and they sit in community, and the person who has been influenced by this I actually I don't want to put words in their mouth. I don't think they would call it a demon. But that sort of stuck spirit, they put them in the middle with a sheet on top, and they start drumming and chanting all around them, and everyone helps to cultivate this trance with the person in the middle sort of feeling the permission to actually let all their defenses down and allow that energy to vibrate through them and move this wind out of them so that they come out of it much lighter and more open and curious and sort of tuned into a sense of possibility and hope again. So that's one sort of tradition in Iran.
Are there any plant medicines involved, or
not at all?
But they burn certain incense, don't they?
Incense? I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I don't know.
I've never attended one, but I've seen documentaries about them, and I've noticed that they burn certain incense, and I always wonder what they are.
I'd be curious. Yeah, I don't know.
So are those the only Iranian tribes that you sat with?
Intimately, yes. Scholarly, I think there are many. I mean, I'm even more interested in, in Bushehr, like all the southern sort of parts, the Bandari parts of Iran, because there's a really deep and old tradition of drumming, and music is really a core essence, and also what we now call sort of somatic practices for healing trauma is really a form of very classical sort of traditional dance in Bandari music in the south. So even this movement that they have where they're shaking their shoulders and they shake the hips quite intensely, like I've never seen anything like it, is something that now in Western sort of somatic practices is sort of a therapeutic movement, because if you shake the body, that sort of vibration can move things out of you. But in these parts of Iran, they're just ancient sort of dance and movement practices that are really in celebration of joy and community, but I think ultimately they were also just healing methodologies, like ancient technologies that got the body to come to some form of balance again.
And most Iranians do it without even knowing why they're doing it, but it comes so naturally to us.
Yes, like you put on music and everyone starts doing their,
and all the shoulder and the hip movement. It's in our DNA. It has been for many years.
Yes, exactly.
So it's so fascinating that you've had the opportunity of working in both the Middle Eastern traditions and the Western traditions. Are there any other similarities and unity that you have discovered between the two?
Between the two? It's a good question. One thing I'll say, and I think this is not just between the two, but really globally, what I'm noticing is that we're all really hungry for love. We're almost desperately hungry for intimacy. And a lot of my patients, and I see it globally, that people feel almost this emptiness or this void inside themselves that they're trying to fill with, you name it, with food, with substances, with shopping, with consumption of media, with screen time, with like whatever you can imagine, even with their pets or so on. And it just doesn't get filled. There's a level of isolation and this longing that doesn't feel fed. And I think that is an ultimate longing for intimacy, for really the divine, for something much larger than just one person. And I think everywhere we need that and we want that. I think in the East, that sense of collectivism is an established worldview point. You sort of think about group harmony before you think about the individual. And I think the West is really longing for that and is awakening to how isolated it's been thinking about things and how maybe individualistic it's been thinking about things. But I also think that the East is a little lost in like what's community and like what are we actually building? Because some of our shadow is also that we care too much about not losing face, so we can get into these spaces of inauthenticity, you know, like thought of, and kind of managing people and merging. And I think I'm rambling, but like I think all of that for me is that actually what everyone is longing for is freedom to love and be loved and to believe in and hope for something that's much larger than just me. And whether that's connection with nature or in my practices like God. And so yeah, I hope that that's where we'll actually all meet one day.
Incredible. There are other aspects of your work that are also fascinating. One aspect that I find very interesting is inclusivity in psychedelic medicine. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, something that's been painful, and I got a PhD in the West, which ultimately means my education has always been within a very hierarchical organizational system. So within a power dynamic, I've always been the one who listens and learns from somebody who is higher in power in that organization. What that hierarchy can create is not sort of like not creating the possibility to actually explore freely, to come to wisdom on your own, or what feels natural, or experientially come to something, or really for knowledge to really land for you and to be seen and to be valued. And that power structure, and anytime we create something where there's some hierarchy, there's going to be something in the energy, even if we're being very kind and nice. It's just the nature of creating roles that are inherently a little like this. Then inclusivity is going to be compromised, whether we want it or not. And however much we try, not everyone will feel as included as they should in a container that's ultimately meant to be healing and therapeutic. So that's my hope, that like, can psychedelic medicine or the field move into a more, it has a word, it's escaping me right now, but instead of a hierarchical structure, can it actually be like mycelium? Can everybody involved in sort of co-creating the energy field together? And we don't necessarily, everybody is welcomed, everybody's voice is sort of heard. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that classically in the West, of course, it's overwhelmingly, you know, stereotypically male and white dominated. And so what I've heard a lot from my patients is that a lot of people who are a part of the BIPOC community, whether they're Black, Indigenous, or a person of color like Brown, Middle Eastern, Asian, they're usually not a part of the conversation, even though they actually are. They are the participants of the studies, they are the patients, they are involved, but they're not a part of the conversation. And because they're minority. And so to me, some of the work is, there is so much wisdom actually held in these groups and communities that's both ancient and also important in a modern society that is just not included.
And
so how can
it be improved?
We have to, how can we include them? I think initially sort of like coming back into the self and wondering, what is my worldview? Am I contributing to a system of hierarchy? Am I more drawn to listen to somebody who's stereotypically the leader, or the thought, the thinker, or the thought leader, or whatever? Or can I start to actually pivot to think a lot more openly, and to wonder, like, maybe there's a possibility actually in this pocket of the world, and can I go and ask and sit there and just listen? I think for people, at least in my position and much higher, people who are leaders in this field, there can be a lot more listening that can happen, like actually going into these communities, really sit back, like sit in the back of the room and just hear stories, listen to what's going on for people and what are their experiences, and so that there's a creation of sort of intimacy, because sometimes we can think we know what's going on, but we have no idea. And if you ask a lot of minorities when they enter Western psychedelic ceremonies, they often don't feel safe. They actually don't feel safe. And it's not just that, it's also women. A lot of women who join ceremonies, lots of these ceremonies are held by male facilitators. They don't feel safe because of the history of violence and oppression, and so when the history has been oppressive and violent, and even if you're the kindest person, you have to understand that people are coming in with traumas and their own sort of experiences with these power dynamics, and so we have to be curious about how do we tend to these sometimes very subtle energies to make people feel safer and more included, that I think a lot of the time in ceremonies people don't think about, in my experience.
I agree. And then when we move on to integration work, there is the cultural context, especially for immigrants. How important is cultural context?
Yeah, beautiful. It's a great question. I want to say it is and it's not, only because I recently, I was in the Amazon. I sit with the Shipibo people of Peru, and I love them because they're herbalists and they're so connected with nature, and nature is really their master teachers, and they really stay behind the plant teachers. They don't assume that they are the healers. And I thought, after sitting for a month or so, coming out of it, that integration would become very challenging because they're not it's not my culture. The group, I was the only person from the Middle East. I usually am, and like all these things. But integration unfolded really beautifully with practices that essentially, if I want to get scientific a little bit about it, but there's something to it, is just practices that really cultivate activation in the right brain, which is just work with your hands, work with sound, work with movement, work with heart-to-heart connection, work with people who care, sit in compassionate spaces, which any culture has the power to create. Any culture has their own ways that they work with their hands, and they're in crafts, and they move their bodies, and they sing songs, and so on. So part of it is there's a way to tap into your own culture as long as you're in touch with your own body and your own sort of sense of, can I be in my hands? Can I be in my breath? Can I be with myself? Can I be in my heart? And can I safely feel seen with this group, integration group, or whoever you're working with? But I'm very curious. I've never had the experience. I'm actually very curious. That's why I can't answer the question. I've never been in a Persian, for example, cultural context of integration, and I've always been so curious about it, because imagining that if I really sit with, for example, Persian chanting, or if I sit with our drumming, or really delve into, imagine a group of people who are dancing together, like the typical Gher style, like what would land, and what would get integrated in ways that I don't have access to right now. I don't know.
It's one of my greatest curiosities as well.
Yeah.
A lot of the times in ceremony, I feel the need to hear Rumi.
Right.
And in your own language, and the depth of the spirituality that we have grown up with.
Yes.
rather than listening to songs in languages that we don't understand. And I
Yes.
understand that when you're that state of consciousness, language doesn't matter, and it's the vibration, and you understand the vibration, and you don't need the words. But sometimes you do.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I sit there and say, I wish I knew what they're singing.
Yes. Yes.
So hopefully
Yes.
one day we will have ceremonies in which we'll have Persian musicians and Persian poetry, and I would really like to experience that.
Yes, that's part of the mission. You've had Mehran here. That's part of the mission of how do we create more containers for Iranians. Not to make it into this like Iranians and non-Iranians. I'm also not fully interested in that kind of experience.
Yes, I don't believe in exclusivity.
Yeah, not like that. But somebody actually on a talk at Breaking Convention, I think it was this morning, said, I loved it when they said that. They said language is an embodied worldview. And there's no denying that. It's like knowing Farsi, like knowing Persian, has shaped the way I relate to the world. And so when I hear Persian, it does spark that embodiment of what I know to be true in this lifetime. Some resonance in me gets activated. I have no way of explaining what happens, but it's like my heart just vibrates. And I actually had a call with a friend of mine who is a Sufi practitioner, and he was reading a Mevlana, like a Rumi poem to me, and out of nowhere, he's just reading it, and I just start sobbing, and I don't know what's happening because it wasn't necessary. He hadn't gone to the description even of like what is he saying in this poem. I was just hearing the words, and I couldn't help myself but to just like sob uncontrollably. Like my heart had just cracked open. And so he starts crying, and we are in this sort of trance-like state just through language, And I can't explain, like, is it in my DNA? Is it from when I've been born? Is it? I don't know, but I think it's a good thing to kind of create and see and feel into the resonance. I think it's important.
I agree. Let's now talk about spirituality, body, and healing. How do you incorporate mind and body practices and ancestral wisdom into your psychotherapy or psychedelic work?
Oof, great question. Even taking it very sort of in a more technical way, before I go into any session with a patient, I have a space where I go into stillness and silence, and I'm in prayer. I'm in prayer essentially in service of love, like capital L, love, knowing that again, I'm standing behind all the masters of love, sort of help guide the session. And that practice or that pivot in energy makes it so that I actually relinquish control. And so I'm not necessarily attached to needing something to happen or needing the patient to have an outcome or needing them to be someone. But it's a full sort of, can we just be present to what's unfolding in the here and now. And that to me is a spiritual practice and also an embodied practice, because when there's that sense of non-attachment to an idea of healing or improvement or feeling better or something, we're actually guided towards awakening or knowing or awareness in more spiritual sort of embodied ways. But I think setting the stage up for that means humility, like a lot of humility of like, I'm not going to control or rule what's going on here, even if a lot of patients want that. which is my experience. They come in and they're like, "You're the expert, and you tell me what's wrong with me, and you tell me what I need to do." But my practice is to always sort of leave that up to all the allies in the room and from above and down below, and so that's in the clinical aspect of things. But for myself, honestly, the most potent spiritual practice for me is that sort of silence and stillness and attunement to any point of discomfort and pain and tension, and really going there and fully, completely embodying that aspect, that part of myself, giving it my full attention and telling it, "Hey, I'm here with you," and then sort of practicing non-attachment and then dissolving into again something much bigger than myself is really my practice. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
It does.
I tend to speak esoterically, so I don't know if it's...
I understand it.
Okay.
What does healing mean to you? Not just clinically, but spiritually or cosmologically?
The word that's coming to me is the process of becoming, or any type of awakening. It doesn't mean it's easy or pleasant or comfortable. That to me is not necessarily healing. That can be a byproduct, and that's wonderful. If we reach a place of lightness, it's like, yes. But really healing is, can I be a compassionate portal to awaken to where am I closing myself off to love, and why? And do I believe that I can actually reach love, be love, go back to love, become love? And if so, how? And that to me is healing. And that can be very unique to every person. Like it's not the same formula for anybody, right? But I think something that's not healing is if we're constantly in a cycle of suffering and cannot see where we're stuck. And so that sort of seeing of or being with pain already is healing, even if it's uncomfortable and painful ultimately. And to do it, I'll add, again, it's like to do that in community is even more, is what I'm really wanting. We tend to do it alone a lot, at least where I am in the world. But to create containers where together we can all awaken to all the ways that we're closing ourselves off to possibility of love and kindness. And then to take like mini steps of like, just be a kinder, better human in whatever shape or form.
I think we need a bit of pause after that answer. let it sink in. It's beautiful. So for therapists of color who are from immigrant backgrounds, who want to enter the psychedelic space, do you have any guidance?
Where are they?
Wherever they are.
Trust yourself. Because systemically we are up against barriers, economical, you name it. Systemically there are barriers. So it's very tempting to constantly feel inferior or like an imposter, or like, who am I to be in these spaces, or who am I to follow my dreams, or all of that. I know people of color especially deal with this sort of problems with confidence, or this sort of discernment of this is a path and I'm permitted and I'm welcomed actually, and I'm guided and I'm gonna do this. So I think short answer, and it takes a lot of discernment and really discipline and a commitment to trust. Just keep trusting. Trust yourself. Surround yourself with people who trust you and support each other. Find organizations and programs that you really have a felt sense of support and inclusion and that cultivation of trust and safety, which are not common, but they, as much as hopefully they will be more common. But yeah, the word that comes up is like trust, and how do we keep coming back to that grounded sort of like almost like self-assured and community assured, like we also belong. We belong in these spaces. Actually, our ancestors have already been there, have already done this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a more sort of psychological or practice. But on a logistical level, God, we need more spaces. We need more inclusive, safer, kinder, more loving, and more resourceful spaces, because it's a struggle for a lot of people. There are a lot of barriers.
Mm-hmm. You are an activist as well.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of world are you hoping to create?
Whew. The thing that I just had a vision of the heart space, and the physical heart. And do we actually feel it? Are we actually sort of in the experience of the physical and the metaphysical heart space? Or are we really constantly attached to an idea of what the world is or needs to be? Or are we connected to something beyond that? My activism is really being an ally to wisdom keepers, like you mentioned in the beginning, our elders, our ancestors, the teachers, the masters, all the plant medicines who are here, and I would love to support them. And you just feel, it's a feeling, and you feel the resonance. And when I feel the resonance, I like to just put them on I'd like to keep sort of supporting them in every way that I can. Mm-hmm. And when I tap into my rage or my sort of whatever that is, I take the spotlight away from hyper intellectual, hyper sort of material spaces that are very much attached to an idea, but not in the full practice and embodiment of the heart. That's a judgment I have. I'll just put it out there.
But we're still ultimately human.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you are in the process of changing your name.
Yes.
From Sadaf Lotfalian to Ahu Yara.
Yes.
Tell me about that transition.
It happened a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny story. A friend of mine the other day said, "Wow, you're really a rebel, aren't you?" Because I'm about to live in a camper van for the however long. I don't have a home. And I said, yeah, I guess so. And one funny story I have is that I was in Tehran, and I gathered my family in this like occasion, and I had prepared myself for battle to announce to them that I'm changing my name. And my grandfather was 92 back then. You know, my grandmother, my mother, uncle.
This is a year ago.
This is a year ago, a year and something ago. They were all sitting there, and I said, "Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, and I understand if anything comes up, but I'm changing my name." And they're all like, "Oh yeah, okay. You would do that." It's just, there's nothing. And what was really beautiful was that my grandfather is a poet, and he's a writer, and he has a book of names from Persian poetry. All the names that have been used in classical Persian poetry are in that book. He, like, when I grabbed the book, he's like, "Go through this book, name by name, sit with it, feel into every name, take your time, don't rush into this." My mother, like, came back with 10 names on a list and was like, "These are my suggestions. I think you should take them. They're great." And my grandmother, being my grandmother, was like, "I think you should take my name. I think that's the best way to go." So everyone was so supportive and loving. And together with my spiritual mentor, who's been a dear friend of mine and my mentor for about 12 years now, Ahu Yara, both just phonetically, but also just in my body, in every sense, really landed. And my great uncle used to call me Ahu as a child. And my patients and my friends who take psilocybin in my presence usually see Ahu behind me that appear. And Ahu, deer, which means a deer, the animal. And a deer has a very interesting energy because it's both very vigilant, and it's at the bottom of the food chain. It's usually the prey, but it's also incredibly it has a lot of grace and a lot of sort of strength in its delicate sort of grace. And so one way I counterbalanced the energy of Ahu was with Yara, which means full of capacity, very capable and strong. And the transition has been, socially it's been made. I'm now called Ahu Yara by everyone, but I'm in the legal process doing it in Iran. I have to start from there and then doing it here, and that's a whole process. But I'm very, I know that there's a very strong felt sense of something has ended and something is beginning as a rite of passage. And it's been an incredibly difficult, I'm 38, my 30s have been incredibly difficult, but I treat them as like a true rite of passage. And there's a pivot that's happening, and I don't think it'll be the last time I change my name. But for now, this is the new chapter, the new invitation.
I would like to end this episode with that beautiful story, Dr. Ahu Yara.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, likewise. Thank you for all that you do.
Give thanks.